In today's video, I'll tell you a story about a project implementation that I was leading a few years back. So I hope you're comfortably seated with your favorite blanket and a coffee. So that story takes place before COVID, before everything went downhill. I was nominated to lead the implementation of a new project for one of our largest customers yet, which is one of the largest global food manufacturing company. And I was assigned a team of 2 consultants and a solution architect to run the project together. The interesting particularity of the project was that they were located in Mexico City, so their native language was Spanish. They wanted to implement a bunch of applications, I think 5 if I recall correctly. They were of different nature and required the intervention of multiple business units. So we already knew that the scope of work was quite large and we would have to navigate our way around gathering requirements between the different teams of the customer. So we kicked off the project and everybody was excited, everything went well, and we started to do some demos of the solution, everything online so far. But back in the day, our standard practice was to actually go on site for requirements gathering. So our team of 4 booked our trip and went to visit them in Mexico City for a full week of requirements gathering sessions. And because they had different teams with different purposes and different applications to build, they flew in everybody. And I'm talking everyone. There were about 30 people in the room at all times when we were running those sessions. And the challenging part was that most of them did not speak English very well. So most of them actually required an interpret. So during those 5 days, we actually had 2 interprets at all time in the room with us who were translating back and forth everything we were saying. So imagine sitting in front of 30 people and having to explain very complex and technical stuff while they don't even understand what you're saying. So the role of the interpret was basically translate in real time whatever we were saying in English into Spanish for the Spanish speakers. And they had a little earplugs and they were listening to the Spanish translation, not really us talking in English. And vice versa, whenever somebody was speaking in Spanish, we had to listen to the little device in which the translator was speaking. So that whole week was very interesting because it was, in my opinion, a little slower from what I've seen in the past gathering requirements. And that's to be expected. When people don't even speak the same language, it's actually very impressive that we managed to gather almost all requirements there during that whole week and have agreements between the different teams. At the time, my worry was people didn't really understand what they agreed to. There were some takeaways to follow up on, but I think mostly we did a good job. And at the end of the week, I think everybody was happy. I think we created a very nice bond and connection with the customer, and we gathered the requirements that we needed to, and so we flew back. Something that helped is that also I was speaking a little bit of Spanish at the time, so I could understand what they were saying even without the interpret, because sometimes the interpret, although they did a good job, they didn't translate things exactly the way I would have understood them if I was speaking the initial language. So it did help me to speak a little bit of Spanish then, but it also helped me understand their culture and also the little subtlety of the way they speak even in English. So later on the project, even if we were remotely connecting all together and speaking English, knowing Spanish actually helped me understand what they wanted to say, because some of them didn't really have a good English, so understanding where they came from really helped me. But anyway, we went back home and we started the project. So based on the requirements, we documented everything, got them approved, and then we started to configure the solution. And everything wasn't perfect, but mostly going well. Like every project, there will be changes in requirements along the way, but I think we did a pretty solid job initially to document what we needed to get started. And I think most importantly, we had a very good relationship with the customer, and I think going to Mexico City to see them was very critical in achieving that. So during testing, there were a lot of feedback back and forth, but nothing unexpected. We delivered the project a little later because of all of this, but we were still within budget, so everything was good. However, there was one thing that was raised during UAT that nobody thought of before we even started the project, and that was that they had to migrate from the previous systems hundreds of thousands of historical records, including sub-records and their attachments. So needless to say, that was a very big miss on the scope of the project. We were almost wrapping up testing, and now we had a massive new requirements that we had to fulfill. And of course, the customer expected this to be done from go live day 1. We were only a few weeks away from go live. There was no way we could actually figure this whole thing out. So we were transparent with the customer. We told them this would take a lot of time. So just to consider how we would do it would take time, and then actually testing it and then doing it in production would take even longer. So we told them, well, you can go live with the solution and then shortly after we'll import your historical data. So they agreed to proceed that way. And so we assigned a team member to work on the historical data import on our side. The challenge was one of the 2 consultants that I mentioned were assigned to the project initially went on mat leave at this exact moment. So I was only down to 1 consultant to figure this whole thing out. And although they were a great consultant, they were not experienced enough to handle all of these things. And back then I didn't really know this would be such a big issue. So that consultant was tasked to figure out how to handle the historical data import. And I thought they knew what they were doing. So they went on and tried. But after a couple weeks of trial and error, it became pretty apparent that our product couldn't import that much data. So the consultant kept working on it, asking questions around and escalated internally internally to the solution architect to try to find out a solution for the customer. I was keeping a close eye on all of this, but I couldn't do much because I didn't know anything about the technical problems that they were facing. And as a project manager, this was not my only customer, so I didn't also have that much time to dedicate to them. Also, both our team and the customer were focusing on delivering the application and the go live that was about to happen. Therefore, the historical data import was kind of a second thought, and we didn't think it would be such a big deal. So the go live went on and everybody was happy. The solution was actually working very well for the customer. And after the go live, we went back to the historical data import, which still had some issues. And the problem was that the files were too big, they were just too much data. Every time you would try to import it, it would time out. And the consultant, with the help of the solution architect, tried to import it in a lot of different ways, but nothing worked. So after the customer went live, they were obviously asking where the data would come in. And I've been telling them the truth. I've been transparent all along that we didn't really have a date. We were working on it, but we were hitting some problems. But now it was the time to escalate. So I did escalate this problem to my director and the product team. There was an internal process for escalation, so I had to wait a little bit of time to get some help from that team. At first, they were only suggesting a few things here and there we could try, but nothing we haven't tried already. But then they realized that we were really hitting a roadblock and they needed to jump on. And they finally did. They acknowledged that the consultant that was working on this problem was not technical enough and they needed to jump in. So another solution architect, a lot more technical, was assigned to the project to help out with this. Again, it took quite some time because they had to rebuild another brand new environment to try and test on. But after a few weeks, they kind of figured out what would need to happen. And basically the answer was that you have to break down the data into a lot more smaller files and then import them one by one on a very specific schedule. So it was finally possible to import the data. The problem was it was a very manual process that would take months. And that person that accepted to help us on the project didn't have that time. So again, we pulled in somebody else that was going to help on the project. So we brought in somebody who was kind of newer in the team, but still was technical enough in order to debug some of the issues that may arise. And they were tasked with running imports pretty much 24/7. They didn't have to actually be up at night and click on button, but they had to carefully schedule all of the different imports that would run 24/7 on the platform. And I worked with the technical solution architect to put a plan together to know exactly what steps need to happen and when in order to hit some deadline. Because that was another thing. The client grew frustrated with all of this situation. All of this work that was happening behind the scene took about like 2-3 months to figure out what we would need to do. And the customer grew tired of waiting for the data and my answers of non-committing to anything. Finally, when we built that plan, they give us a deadline. They told us you have to finish this by April 1st. At the time, that was only 2 months away, and the plan that we put together was 1.5 months. So we thought we could achieve that, and we had a little bit of buffer in there. And I know what you're thinking, we didn't make it. But actually, we did. Things went really well, and thanks to the solution architect and the consultant working very tightly together, and with myself also communicating with the customer, we were able to import all of their data within the 1.5 month, and we did finish earlier before the deadline that they provided. And at the end of all of this, the customer was pretty frustrated that it took so long, but they were very happy that we finally did it. They were able to move on from all of this distraction, finally close the project and focus on the user adoption and make sure the solution works for them. Although it's quite a happy ending story, there is a lot of things that I've learned throughout this project. So one thing that I realized that I didn't really know previously is that it really helps to know and understand the culture of the people you work with. Just knowing a little bit about the environment they work in or the language they speak at work really helps. Another thing that is pretty standard on any project is that you want to uncover everything as early as possible. So at the beginning of the project, you really want to dig deep on all the different topics. Because in this scenario, if we would have identified very early on that we would have needed to import all of this historical data, I think we could have done it within the initial timeline. Another thing that is important to know as a project manager is the skill set of the people that are assigned to your project. Because they may have the title, but people have different backgrounds and technical skills. And in this particular scenario, my team didn't have the technical expertise to deal with this issue. So we kind of wasted time trying to find out a solution. Also, don't hesitate to escalate a problem internally. If you're hitting some product limitation, go talk to the product team. And that's where crafting relationship with the different teams or the different department really comes into play. So here you have it. That was my little war story on this project. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, leave a like or a comment. Also let me know if you like this format and if you want to hear more stories like this one. Merci, and au revoir.